Coming up next on Insights on PBS Hawaii, Election 2014, Charles Djou and Mark Takai. Aloha and welcome to Insights on PBS Hawaii. I'm Daryl Huff with Hawaii News Now, your host for tonight's show. The contest to replace Colleen Hanabusa, who left her seat to run unsuccessfully for the U.S. Senate, has come down to two men, former Congressman Charles Djou, the Republican candidate, and State Representative Mark Takai, the Democratic nominee. Tonight, Insights brings you a discussion with the candidates running for the office of U.S. Representative in the 1st Congressional District, Urban Oahu. We invite you to join our conversation by calling, emailing, or tweeting your questions and comments. The seating order and the first questions were chosen by random draw. Now to our candidates. Republican Charles Djou represented the 1st Congressional District for about 8 months between May 2010 and January 2011. Mr. Djou has also represented East Honolulu as a city councilman and Kaneohe in the State House, where he was minority floor leader. He is a major in the U.S. Army Reserve and served in Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan from 2011 to 2012. Representative Mark Takai has been a state lawmaker for nearly 20 years. He has served as chairman of the House Committee on Veterans, Military, and International Affairs, Culture, and the Arts. He is a lieutenant colonel in the Army National Guard and was deployed to the Middle East in 2009 as part of Operation Iraqi Freedom. Now, our first question is going to go to Mr. Djou. You know, you offer Hawaii an opportunity to finally have a seat in the majority of the U.S. House. But does the Republican agenda in Congress of smaller government and social conservatism, does it really match the values and interests of the state of Hawaii?
Well, Daryl, let me begin by saying thank you very much for having me here. It's my pleasure to join you and Hawaii Public Television this evening. To answer your question, however, it's not about what caucus or whatever congressional leaders are. For me, what's important is putting Hawaii first, and Hawaii's interests first, and who can be that vigorous, outspoken advocate that Hawaii so desperately needs right now. And being able to be that vigorous, outspoken advocate in the majority caucus is more helpful for our community right now. It's critical, having lost 90 years of seniority between the last election and this election, that Hawaii have somebody who can hit the ground running, somebody who can have a seat at the table in the majority caucus when those major decisions are being made over there in Washington.
Well, would you say, though, that the Republican majority positions are generally in line with Hawaii voters' values?
Well, I think there are a number of things that the Republican Party has advanced that I think are very much in alignment of limited government, of fiscal responsibility, of watching how the people's money is being spent, about being an advocate for a healthy, vibrant, growing economy. I think these are all values that I think are good, positive, that click with Hawaii's voters. But again, I want to emphasize here, Daryl, for me, it's not about party. It's not about what the Republicans or the Democrats are interested in. Heaven knows that, you know, right now in Washington, D.C., things are so poisonous between the parties. For me, it's about getting things done for the people of Hawaii.
Okay, Mr. Takai, you know, how do you overcome this fairly simple logic that with Republicans in a majority in Congress, that it makes sense for the Hawaii delegation to have at least one person on the Republican team?
Well, you brought up a very good point in terms of Charles getting there and actually his first vote going to be for Speaker Boehner and the Tea Party Republicans. And I do believe that the values of the Tea Party Republicans do not reflect our values in Hawaii. So there is a clear choice. There's a choice in supporting Charles and his Tea Party Republican friends, or there's a choice in supporting Mark Takai, a very progressive, family-oriented, and working people priority person, and I do believe that that matters. So I think from a values perspective, it's going to be very important to make sure we get the person into Congress who represents Hawaii's values the most.
Well, why does it make a difference in that sense of when in practical terms, you know, it's nice to have someone with a vote in the majority?
Well, let's go back to some of the votes taken by Charles when he was in Congress in 2010. You know, he voted with the Tea Party Republicans and against Wall Street reform. And you remember now in 2009 we had that fiscal crisis that even affected Hawaii. In fact, Hawaii suffered a $1 billion fiscal crisis, and it was that time when Governor Lingo instituted furloughs for our students at the public schools.
Charles, you want to respond to that? I saw you itching to jump in.
Let me just follow up here, Daryl, on this. I think, the problem we have in Washington, D.C. and our Congress today is all this bickering that's going on here. The Republicans and Democrats, I say pox on both of their houses here. It's all this immature yelling between the partisan leaders over there in Congress that isn't getting things done and isn't taking care of the American people and the residents here in Hawaii. Now, for me, my approach has been very, very clear here, and you can look at my record as being rated as one of the only centrists remaining in the Congress during my term over there in the Congress. Because for me, it's not about partisanship, it's about getting things done for the people of Hawaii. And Daryl, I think this is a very sharp, clear distinction between myself and my opponent. That for me, it's not going to be about whether or not I'm going to call some other person a name or cast aspersions on them. For me, I'll work with anybody. I don't care if you're a Republican or you're a Democrat. I don't care if you're a conservative or a liberal. All I care about is, are you going to get things done and you're going to make life better for the people here in Hawaii?
Can we move on to an issue now?
Well, I wanted to go back to, again, 2010. You remember we were in that crisis, and ARA funds, the stimulus money came in 2009, and there were a number of votes in 2010, one of which supported the teachers and provided funding to states and Hawaii in particular. It was very important.
I'm going to interrupt you for a second, Mark, because
Yes.
we're going to go into these issues later on, and I'm confident we're going to get questions from viewers. Right now, I think we're talking about whether an alliance with a certain party is good for Hawaii or bad for Hawaii, and do you feel that what Mr. Djou is saying, that he essentially will repudiate even his own party in order to serve Hawaii, do you think that that's a realistic position?
Well, I believe Charles has a track record that we can talk about, but in terms of me being a Democrat, I'm a very proud Democrat, and in fact, I think it's important for Hawaii to have a united delegation. We've had a united delegation for many years, and it's worked. So I want to go to Washington and work with Senator Schatz, Senator Hirono, and Congresswoman Gabbard. I think it's very important to have that united delegation, and I'm a proud Democrat, and we'll get it done.
Okay, can I move on to an issue?
Sure.
Thank you. Social Security and Medicare, the question of how to handle the growing cost of these entitlement programs, especially with the changes in demographics, it seems to come down to a question of either cutting benefits, raising revenue, or both. Let me start with you, Mr. Djou. How would you balance these things? What are the reasonable choices we have for keeping these programs sustainable? Do you have to raise taxes? Do you have to cut benefits?
Daryl, let me respond to that in several parts here. Number one, first and foremost, we have to make absolutely certain that anybody who's currently on Medicare or Social Security, anybody coming close to getting on Medicare and Social Security, our government has made a contract with the American people. We cannot violate, we cannot, must not change or alter that program for anybody on it or close to getting on it here. And you have my word if I'm privileged to earn your support to be a congressman, that I will honor that commitment. Now, in terms of making sure that we maintain the long-term commitment to Social Security and Medicare and entitlements here, it comes down to a question of trust. Who can you trust who's actually going to be able to get the job done? And for me, I would never take a position of, say, taxing pensions on seniors, that ever in any circumstance would be a good idea to even discuss. And for me, I've always been committed to that, look, for those who are on it, let's not change it. But yes, I am willing to explore other options, I think, for younger workers. A particular proposal I think that has been put about there is a proposal called the My RA, which would allow individuals to put aside some of their own some of their own income into an account for save for their retirement in the future, for individuals especially who do not have ability to access, say, a 401k plan or an IRA plan. I think these are proposals that over the long term are the best proposals for the American people, so we make sure we preserve that social safety net for our senior citizens.
Okay, does that mean that you end up charging those people who might get that savings plan? Are you saying that for people who are not immediately close to Social Security or Medicare age, that you will look at some kind of cut to benefits or increase in taxes in order to pay for their
No, I'm not talking about cutting benefits here, and I'm also make very, very clear here, I do not support an increase in taxes. That always seems to be the knee-jerk reaction in Washington, D.C., to make it more difficult to live in Hawaii, increase the cost of living here in our community by just simply raising taxes. I don't support that. I don't think that's a good idea. But those individuals who don't have an access to an IRA plan or to a 401k plan, that is something I think is worthwhile that we should explore and something that I'm very encouraged about.
Mr. Takai, your response or your thoughts about that?
Well, my position on Social Security is very different from Charles. I will not cut any benefits to Social Security, regardless of age. You know, the proposal that Charles supported 2 years ago called Simpson-Bowles talked about cuts to Social Security. It talked about increasing the age of Social Security by 2 years. It also talked about supporting the change CPI, which the Republicans, the Tea Party Republicans in Congress support. I don't support that. What I do support, though, is increasing the cap of income that is taxed to Social Security.
Explain what that means to an individual who might be eligible for that.
Right. So right now, a millionaire and someone making $117,000 pays the same Social Security tax, exactly the same. And I do believe that that cap has to be raised. If we raise the cap, we're going to extend the life of Social Security by 75 years. Right now, I believe we have about 19 years left if we do nothing.
So it's basically a tax increase on the higher income level.
Absolutely.
You know, Daryl, let me respond to this in several points here. You know, I think just name calling is immature and it's not helpful to what's going on in our nation. We face some very serious problems. And indeed, I think that's exactly the problem we have in Washington right now. There's too much of this immature name calling and not enough of problem solving. These proposals that I'm putting forward here, the bipartisan deficit reduction proposal, which my opponent was citing here, keep in mind here, is the president's proposal. The president, Barack Obama, put this together. The My IRA proposal, that comes from who? Not from right-wing Tea Party Republicans. It was a proposal offered by our president, Barack Obama, in his State of the Union address. These are common sense solutions. We got to find ways to bridge this partisan divide here. There's enough of that yelling and shouting over there in Washington, D.C. Let's get rid of that. Let's get things done. That's what my campaign's about.
You know, I have a 20-year track record of being in the legislature, and I've done quite well working hand in hand with colleagues across the aisle, both in the House and the Senate. So in terms of bipartisanship, look at my record, I'm very proud of it. But I'm talking about Charles's record. He's on record supporting Simpson-Bowles. And you can't say—
On record supporting the president.
On record supporting the—
Simpson-Bowles.
On record supporting the budget proposal called Simpson-Bowles. And we should talk about the specifics about that, because I think it's important for the viewers and the voters to understand what specifically that means. Well, it means an increase in Social Security age, it means change CPI, it means elimination of the mortgage interest deduction, and in fact, it means significant cuts to the Department of Defense. That's what Simpson-Bowles.
Well, that was also 5 years ago. So, you know, let's make sure we talk about looking ahead here a little bit. I just want
Daryl, let me just point out here. Who's behind all of this here? Who's making these proposals here? It's the President of the United States,
well, it was
Barack
a bipartisan
Obama.
commission
Yes,
that he
and
adopted,
I mean also
that
one of the most outspoken voices in favor of this from our community here in Hawaii is the woman we're seeking to replace, Colleen Hanabusa. And which gets back to my point here. We can yell and shout and call names at individuals all night long. I'm not going to engage in that here. For me, it's about finding pragmatic, practical solutions. Because if you want yelling, if you want immature partisanship here, you can find that on the 24-hour, 7-day-a-week news channels. But if you want somebody who's going to get things done, make things better, find ways to bridge that divide between Republicans and Democrats. Find common sense solutions here offered by the president, offered by the current representative, Democrat Colleen Hanabusa. Then look, I'm willing to do that because I want to get things done. I don't want to further divide this nation. I don't want to exacerbate these problems and get nothing done.
Okay, last point.
All I'm saying is that if we talk about issues such as balancing the budget and issues such as Social Security, we should also talk about records. And I do believe that Charles is running away from his record. He supports Simpson-Bowles, and people need to understand what that means in terms of Social Security, what that means in terms of the mortgage interest deduction.
You did give us that list,
right.
And I think that we've heard loud and clear. Basically, we're talking about a proposal that is a number of years old now, and that's why I think that the one question I have, though, coming out of this discussion is, and I don't think I got an answer, is do you see any benefit decrease or tax increase in order to make sure that Social Security does, remain sustainable?
short answer to your question, Daryl, is no. But I think actually what you're seeing here in this exchange between myself and my opponent here is a great example of how the two of us very fundamentally approach this job philosophically totally differently here. If you want somebody who's going to be yet another partisan, name-calling, shouting at things here, not getting any things done here, I'm clearly not your person. But I believe here what's important to do is find areas, find policies where Republicans and Democrats can find some common ground here. That's why I'm not running away from my record. I do think it's a good idea that when President Obama announced the bipartisan deficit reduction proposal, that was a good effort. It was a good outstretched hand by Barack Obama, a hand which I was willing to shake and a step in the right direction to get America away from this bitter partisan divide that's so poisoning our politics today.
Okay, now let me move on to another issue then. We've got a number of calls for questions about the cost of living. What is it, and let me start with Mr. Takai, what is it that you would support that would most likely have a dramatic impact, most dramatic impact on the cost of living in Hawaii?
Well, Daryl, you know, when I was deployed to the Middle East, in 2009, I had some time to contemplate why we're fighting a war a half a world away, and the truth is, it's because of black gold or oil. And we are so reliant on foreign fossil fuels here in Hawaii. We import $7 billion of foreign fossil fuel and $2 billion in food. A significant portion of our hard-earned revenues in this state are being exported because we lack sustainability. And as the most populated, isolated landmass in the world, it's very important for us to wean ourselves off of this addiction. So I've made it a priority of mine in the legislature to focus on sustainability and focus on creating opportunities for us to grow more of our own food and wean ourselves off of the addiction to foreign fossil fuel.
Just ask specifically, though, the question from the viewer, and I do want to honor the questions from viewers, is, you know, how does that reduce the cost of living in the short term?
Oh, it's quite significant. I mean, we look at the cost of energy, electricity, for example. We're paying, to start on Oahu, 36 cents, and neighbor islands much higher. Other people across the nation are paying 8 cents a kilowatt. If we can reduce our kilowatt costs to 8 cents like many places in the country, the better off we're going to be.
Okay, Mr. Djou, on this issue of cost of living, or if you want us to talk about energy, we can go to energy as well.
On the cost of living, because, you know, Daryl, I think this is very important. You know, let me share with you. I had a conversation with a good friend of mine just about a little over a week ago, and he's a local guy, fifth-generation resident here in the islands, did all the right things, went to local school, went to UH, got married to a local gal, but he was calling and telling me he was thinking about moving to the mainland. Why? Because now after he got married and had a couple kids and has a house, even though he seemed to have done everything right, did everything society told him to do, went to school, didn't get involved in drugs here, got a great job, he still is struggling to make ends meet. And what's even worse and more frustrating about it here, as my friend was sharing with me, that our government here in Hawaii doesn't seem to be listening and doesn't seem to care. The cost of living is crushing so many people like my friend and thousands of other people just like him here in our community. And there's a lot of drivers that is increasing the cost of living here in our community here in Hawaii. One of the largest drivers, unfortunately, is our own government. It is our government putting needless regulations and laws that are unnecessarily increasing the cost of living. Several examples of that if I am privileged to earn the people's support to be their next congressman, I will work to reform to bring down the cost of living for the people of Hawaii. One example of that here is the Jones Act. It is a monopoly shipping regulation which has unnecessarily raised the cost of goods for the people here in Hawaii. It is an anachronistic law passed 40 years before Hawaii ever became a state that has, and because Hawaii is the only state which relies entirely on shipping to get our goods, whereas most other states also have the option of rail and trucking, we need to find a way to exempt Hawaii from the Jones Act here to immediately bring down the cost of living here in Hawaii for our residents.
Quick follow-up question on that. The Jones Act always comes up in these discussions, and there's a lot of roots to it. Jones Act basically requires an American ship with an American crew to serve at American ports. But have you ever seen a number? Can you give me a number if you got an exemption of how much would actually reduce the cost of living for what some people would say would be a cost to national security, for example, if you exempt Hawaii from it?
Now, a few things here, Daryl. Let me answer the second part of your question first in terms of cost to national security. I'm not talking about repeal of the Jones Act here. What I'm talking about here is exempting our community, Hawaii, from the Jones Act. And a lot of the arguments on national security that are made against reforming the Jones Act were arguments that were similarly made in the 1970s against deregulating the aviation industry. And today you see you can easily take a Hawaiian Airlines flight from Honolulu to Los Angeles on a European-built Airbus has not damaged the United States Air Force or somehow ruined the American aviation industry. I similarly believe you're going to see similar benefits for our community in Hawaii. In terms of numbers, however, there are a number of studies out there. I saw a study relatively recently from the University of Hawaii that estimated that most Hawaii residents pay on average about 4 to 6% more for goods here in Hawaii because of the Jones Act. And by changing this, that alone would immediately put a significant amount of disposable income back in the pocketbooks of every single family here in our community.
Mr. Takai, on the Jones Act specifically?
I support the Jones Act, and I don't support an exemption. I mean, we both agree the importance of the Jones Act in terms of security, national security. But I look at it a little different. You know, and in fact, I wanted to mention another University of Hawaii study that shows that, in fact, if we lose the Jones Act exemption here in Hawaii, it's going to cost families an additional $600 a year, $600 a year more for goods. So, you know, the verdict, I believe, is still out. In fact, the GAO did a study on the Jones Act in Puerto Rico recently, a government accounting office, and came out inconclusive. But here's what I'd say. You remember when we had 3 carriers in Hawaii, air carriers, Hawaiian, Aloha, and then we had GO. When that happened, it totally deflated the cost of air travel, especially between the islands. It was great. It's great temporarily. I mean, we had $29 rates, $49 rates.
Isn't that an argument for competition and shipping?
But here's my point, Daryl. Once that happened, we lost both Aloha and we lost GO. And now, for the most part, we have one carrier and with significant costs. I'm afraid that if we lose the exemption to the Jones Act, we'll have foreign ships come in and basically kick out our American ships. The other thing is, people need to understand that when we talk about foreign flag ships, we're talking about ships not under the jurisdiction and flagged by the U.S. What that means is an exemption to ocean dumping regulations. It means an exemption to wages and labor laws in the United States. And it means a loss of about 9,000 jobs here in Hawaii.
Let me give Mr. Djou a chance to get the last word in on this issue.
Just very quickly here, Daryl. Again, a lot of these arguments were exact same arguments that my opponent is raising today were raised back in the 1970s against deregulating the aviation industry, saying that, well, if you suddenly allow foreign-built aircraft or foreign-built airlines to come here into Hawaii, we'd have these devastating consequences. Indeed, if you look at international aviation today, clearly, Hawaii has been an enormous beneficiary for the expansion of international aviation here in the islands. I believe so too we should exempt Hawaii from the Jones Act so we can reap those same benefits for our community. Again, I go back to here, what this is all about. What does this all come down to? It's not about protecting some big corporation. It's not about some broad view of what's going on in Washington, D.C. For me, Daryl, what this all comes down to is my friend Stephen and his family and the thousands of other families in Hawaii just like that. How do we effectuate and reduce the cost of living for them so they don't have to leave to the mainland? And exempting Hawaii from this piece of legislation will do just that.
Okay, let me bring up health care. Health care is a huge issue. We talked a little bit about Medicare, but VA, the VA situation, both of you are veterans, both of you were aware. You've been in Washington, you've been here at the Veterans Affairs Committee. How did we miss in Hawaii the poor services that were going on? You know, why weren't there alarms raised about cuts to the budget? Why weren't there alarms raised about the long wait times? What happened there? I'll let you start on this one, Mr. Djou.
Well, Daryl, actually, I would submit to you the person you need to ask on this is Mark Takai, who's the chairman of the Military and Veterans Affairs Committee in the Hawaii State House of Representatives. He's probably the best person to ask in terms of why we missed all of this. But in response to you in terms of where we go forward from here, because that's much more important to me than assigning blame. It's figuring out what we do.
But you started by assigning blame.
Well, no, I informed you. You should be asking that question, not of me.
Okay.
But let me just real quickly follow up here, Daryl, in terms of what we do going forward here. Number one, I compliment the president in changing the leadership of the Veterans Administration. I think that was a good, positive first step. We need new faces, we need new blood in the VA. As a veteran myself, as somebody coming back from Afghanistan, had to stand in those lines over in the VA to get my benefits and services, this is something I understand firsthand. But we can't stop at just changing the faces over in the VA, because if we just change the leadership, these same problems we have with incompetence and corruption at the Veterans Administration are going to reoccur again 5, 10, 15 years down the road without structural reform.
Yes, I'm going to stop you there, but let's go. We'll get to the structure issue, but I want to give Mr. Takai a chance to respond to what you said and point that question as, you know, one of the people that held yourself up as someone who was watching out for veterans.
Well, you know, I wanted to just clarify something. Charles knows that I chaired the Veterans Affairs Committee at the state level. The issue with the VA is a federal issue and at the federal level. Now, in the state, I'm very proud of our record. We've increased the number of counselors supporting our veterans at the state level, but it's a totally different system. What we've done in the past 11 years in the state of Hawaii was we created the Military Appreciation Package, and we've done tremendously in support of our veterans and our military in general. So I just wanted to make it clear that I think Charles is getting confused. I am not the congressman yet. My focus has been at the state level, and our focus and priorities at the state level have been very consistently supporting veterans in the military. Now, transitioning to the VA, I was upset, deeply upset, outraged by the situation, and we were all, I believe, caught off guard. Members of Congress were caught off guard. So I think what's important now is what we're doing. And I do support, and I supported Congress in their efforts to increase funding for the VA. Now, Charles may say, because he said in the past that, well, that's a typical response, throwing money at the problem, but let's talk about that. We just came off of a significant war, more than a decade of fighting in the Middle East. The number of veterans that we need to serve, because we have an obligation to serve them, has increased drastically. Here in Hawaii, for example, the last 3 years, we increased the number of veterans needing service by 30%. But we're not talking about simple numbers. We're talking about veterans with very specific, challenging needs that take more time and more money. So the commitment for me, as I hopefully move to Congress, is to make sure that we increase the number of providers, doctors, at our VA here in Hawaii from 5 to 10. I'm also supporting the efforts to develop another center on the west side, West Oahu side, where we can service more veterans directly in the Central and Leeward Coast.
So, Mr. Djou, I know looking ahead a little bit more, which I think Mr. Takai was trying to do, it sounds very appealing to say let's let vets get to private care quicker, and because I think the average person goes, well, why does the government need to provide this service when government is generally not very good at most things that it does? And certainly the VA scandal pointed out that the VA had some serious problems with how it did provide services. But I mean, are you entirely comfortable with pushing these folks who, as Mr. Takai said, need extensive care into the private system? Can the private system handle it?
Well, Daryl, let me respond again to your question in several parts here. And first is to respond directly about this issue of just increasing money. That if we throw more money at a problem, the problem will go away. That's a very typical Washington, D.C. response. That's the universal elixir to all of our problems, whatever it may be, VA or pick anything else, just throw more money at it. I have tended to find that that doesn't work.
So you think the VA has enough money?
Well, no, hang on here.
Okay.
What I'm saying here is not that I'm opposed to increasing funding to the VA. What I am saying here is you're not going to fix the problem if you don't reform the underlying system. If all you do is just throw money at a system that is engaged in corruption and incompetence here, guess what? You're going to have these same problems reoccur again without reforming the system. That's why I'm in favor of reforming the VA and its structure and how it works. What I favor and what I've been a long-time advocate for here is allowing individual veterans, if you want to stay in the VA system, by all means, I think you should be allowed to stay in the system. I'm a veteran myself. I understand that this is part of how it affects myself and affects my family. But if you've earned your benefits as a veteran and you prefer instead to take those benefits and you are taking what you would have received anyway in terms of benefits and would rather port that into the private healthcare system, I believe you should be allowed to do so. What I'm advocating here for, Daryl, is no different than, say, Medicare Advantage. Here in Hawaii right now, or anywhere in the United States, if you're on Medicare and you want to stay in the Medicare system, fine, stay. But if you want to avail yourself to other programs, such as Aloha Care or some of these other Medicare Advantage programs, you can do so. If we're doing that for Medicare, why don't we also do it for the VA system? That's the right way to fix it.
No, but again, I think he makes an interesting point, important point, is this is a government healthcare system. We don't have very many government healthcare systems. Mostly it is done by the private sector. And, you know, frankly, is it better for veterans that they be in this government system?
Well, first of all, I again supported the money that Congress provided immediately to address the immediate concerns in the VA. Without that money, we wouldn't have been able to address the wait times immediately. Now we have wait times still in excess of 30 days, and I do believe short term we should be able to, or we should allow veterans to access the private healthcare system in Hawaii. But I believe that we're talking about veterans with very specific, unique needs. And I believe that the VA system, if done well, would be the best place for us to care for our veterans. We're talking about traumatic brain injury. We're talking about loss of limbs, you know, significant war injuries that I think the private sector would have some difficulty addressing.
Okay, I think we've both been real clear on that. Let's move on to this. What do you think is the next incarnation of Obamacare, Affordable Care Act, healthcare reform? I know, Mr. Djou, you've actually called for repeal of the Affordable Care Act, but
yes.
yeah, where do you think we're going? Where do you think we're going? What do you think is going to be the next incarnation of healthcare reform, especially when it comes to insuring people who are not insured?
You know, Daryl, I think the difficulty I have with the Affordable Care Act is simple. It's not working. You know, this past summer, my son got a bad case of the flu, and it just happened to be at the time he got the flu, our internist was on vacation, and he recommended going to several other doctors. None of the other doctors were willing to accept my son because of the amount of bureaucracy and regulation brought on by the Affordable Care Act. It was going to take so much paperwork, so much time for him to just get a one appointment that by the time all of this was done, he pretty much already recovered from his cold. And it was a common experience I hear over and over again, that the Affordable Care Act, what it has done for average families here in our community, is increase premiums by a rate 4 or 5 times that of inflation. Indeed, you see HMSA and Kaiser increasing their premiums 10, 15%. And the average family does not see a dramatic increase in quality, and see, if anything, a decrease in quality. So that's why I support reforming Obamacare. I'll give the President credit, Daryl, that I think the President got it right. We do need to reform health care in America. But the solution isn't working. Let's find a way to get it to work. And that's why I support 3 very specific reforms. Number 1, medical malpractice tort reform. Number 2, allowing the interstate sale of health insurance. And number 3, the expansion of medical savings accounts. These reforms, if we're able to pass them, I think will do much more to reduce the high cost of health care without compromising the quality of health care in America.
Let me move on to Mr. Takai, your response to this.
I think the goal, the initial goal for the Affordable Care Act is a great one. We have across the nation a number of uninsured people that are now insured. I believe it's 8 million people across the nation are now insured because of ACA. But in Hawaii, we've had a great prepaid healthcare program since the 70s, 1974 to be exact. And I believe that the best approach would be to rework the Affordable Care Act to allow for these waivers that are supposed to start in 2017 and allow it now. Give the state of Hawaii the opportunity to marry in the best parts of the prepaid healthcare program and bring in the best parts of ACA, because there are significant benefits. For example, the 26 coverage to 26, no pre-existing conditions, those types of things coming from the Affordable Care Act are great. But you know, the other thing that I would want to do if given the opportunity to serve in Congress is to take a look at why the increase for businesses here in Hawaii.
Let me interrupt you if you don't mind. The reason I'm interrupting is because we've blazed through about half an hour already. We've basically covered about 4 issues, 5 issues, and I'm going to ask everybody, both of you, to try and, you're both doing a great job of explaining and staying on point, but I want to move through issues a little more quickly.
Sure.
And I think that you both made yourselves clear on that. One more shot at that one.
Yes,
yeah.
of course. So the success of the prepaid healthcare program in Hawaii is that we did what we call community rating. Everybody was thrown in a community and the rate was given for the entire community. The problem with the ACA, and what I'd like to do in Congress, is to change it to community rating. The problem is that it's age banded. So the older you get, the more expensive it is. And I think that's a big issue, not only for older people, but more importantly for businesses. So I would like to see that change. And I think that'll be a considerable change across the board.
Last word on about Obamacare.
Very simple. It's not working for average families. Let's rework it. I'm committed, if privileged, to elect and represent the people of Hawaii, of reworking this gargantuan regulation.
Okay, now on to a huge, very difficult issue that you're both very close to, and that is war. We now have helicopters being used in Syria. We have prospects for an extended war with the Islamic ISIS, whatever you want to call it. Where do you stand? What's the threshold for you, Mr. Djou, on putting boots on the ground, putting Americans at risk to fight this particular kind of threat?
You know, Daryl, again, let me start again answering this question out of the block, that I understand the cost of war. Having served in Afghanistan, having served in a brigade combat team with an infantry division in Afghanistan, I know firsthand the enormous cost to families, the enormous cost to our nation of going to war. I do not want to send any more young people into harm's way unless it directly threats America's national security. In relation to the Islamic State, the threshold question is, do you believe the Islamic State is or is not a threat to American national security? If you believe it is a threat to national security, as the President has outlined, and I agree with the President on, then yes, we must do what we need to do to degrade and destroy ISIS. The President has outlined the plan, which includes airstrikes, a united diplomatic front, and with boots on the ground coming from the countries that are most affected by this.
Okay.
I think it's a decent plan and one I would support and would have voted in favor of in Congress.
Mr. Takai, you've been opposed to this, and do you not think that ISIS is a threat to the homeland at all?
Well, one of the things that I'm proud of being in the legislature is we created the Hawaii Medal of Honor. We were the very first state to honor and recognize our fallen heroes and show the appreciation of what they did to their families. And it's a tough thing. I mean, we've lost over the course of war 331 service members with ties to Hawaii. And I've had a number of conversations with these families, and I can tell you the cost of war runs deep for these families. Many of them have told me that they don't think we should be going back. It's not our war, as I've said before. Now, I would have voted against arming the Syrian rebels. Charles would have supported it.
Well, I think you said you would have, I think you're on record as saying you would have voted against the President even doing anything with Syria.
Well, what I said, though, is I support the President in his efforts to bring together the world coalition. It's very important that we don't do what we've done in the past and do it alone. So the President has, among partner nations across the world, including many in the Middle East, decided to approach this as a coalition. I support that. However, I don't support boots on the ground. I don't support engaging American forces with Syrian rebels, training or whatnot. And I used the example of the Afghan rebels a few years ago in the 1980s.
I mean, most of the folks who are listening here are pretty familiar with this issue, I'm pretty confident. So I just want to get you to the point on this. Do you support the use of American air forces, for example, or helicopters engaged in Syria or Iraq against ISIS?
Actually, I've supported the bombings and engagements on the Iraqi border, on the Iraqi side. I do believe that if we're talking about engaging on the Syrian side, the President needs to come back to Congress and ask for approval.
Let me follow up on this here, Daryl. A couple things here. This is in part based on my experience, having served with the United States Army in Kandahar province in Afghanistan, which is right on the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan. We cannot be so naive to think that warfare is confined to nation states as it once was perhaps in the 18th or 19th century. The reality of modern warfare in the 21st century is that we have these transnational terrorist organizations that do not respect borders. So again, I go back to, do you believe that the Islamic State is or is not a threat to American national security? If they are a threat to national security, and I believe they are, as the President has outlined, then we have to confront them wherever they are. Respecting some international border between Iraq and Syria is naive, and I think ultimately will be used to the benefit of the enemy against our people.
Mr. Takai, last word on this.
Again, I said, Syrian rebels, we don't even know who they are. And the last experience we had training Afghan rebels turned into the Taliban. I think we got to be extremely careful. And I would have voted no, just like Colleen Hanabusa, Tulsi Gabbard, or Tammy Duckworth, our war hero from McKinley.
Okay, I promised to get back to this issue about using government to stimulate the economy. And in your platform, Mr. Takai, you do mention investment in infrastructure, investment in programs, investment in alternate energy. What is your philosophy on the use of deficit spending, for example, to stimulate the economy? Do you think it works?
Well, we needed it in 2009. You remember when Wall Street just went out of control? We had people on Wall Street just abusing the system and taking advantage of billions of dollars, and it caused a world crisis. In fact, it affected us here in Hawaii. As I mentioned, we were $1 billion short of money just because of that. We needed to, the United States Congress needed to, and the state legislature needed to stimulate the economy during those years. It was important because when we have challenges like that, it's important for us to stimulate the economy, feed the construction industry when there's no other construction projects out there. Now when there's a lot of construction, we don't have that responsibility or that need as much. But yeah, sure, I do believe that. But let me just say this about the deficit. We were at about a $1.3 trillion yearly deficit 6 years ago. Today, we're half that much, a little over $500 billion a year. I think the direction is a good one. We're spending less. We're going to get there. We're going to get to that balanced budget, but we've got to do it methodically and with care because we need to understand where those cuts are going to be.
Okay, Mr. Djou, you've taken some strong stances on reducing the federal workforce and against stimulus programs. Do you think the stimulus programs did work ultimately, even though you did criticize them at the time?
You know, Daryl, I think this goes to the heart of a key philosophical difference between myself and my opponent. And at its heart, what's going on here is I think all of your viewers need to ask yourselves, do you have more faith? Where do you think the heart of America is? Is it in our government or it is in our people? I think the stimulus program ultimately was a program that put its faith in the bureaucracy and the government over the people. Yes, we needed to do something, but the stimulus program spent $1 trillion. A lot of the reason that budget deficit immediately ballooned that Mark was pointing out was because of the stimulus. It did not lead to a diminution of the unemployment rate. Indeed, the unemployment rate, after it spiked up in 2009, stayed over 10% for nearly 4 years. The stimulus program didn't work. That's because our faith was placed in the bureaucracy and the government. I'd rather see us, instead of government programs, government this, government that, government controlling everything, let's put that money in the hands of the American people. Individual businesses, individual small businesses, and most important of all, individual Americans are what have and always will turn around our economy and what's make America great.
You know, you use the word faith. Because I think for a lot of people in Hawaii, that's kind of a leap of faith because right now, in a snapshot of time here, we are very dependent on federal jobs. We're very dependent on federal programs like Medicaid and the military. And the prospect of cutting that back, trimming that down, which you advocate, is kind of scary for people. So, I mean, is it really realistic to think we're going to get better? Do we have to get worse and suffer before we get better? You know,
actually, Daryl, you're pointing out actually something that's key to my congressional campaign here. And you're right here. The name of the game in Washington, D.C. in 2014 and for the foreseeable future is not addition. It's subtraction. We're going to have to cut spending. We're going to have to work on reducing this enormous budget deficit and this huge national debt being piled on the backs of our children and our grandchildren. That's why when these decisions are being made in Washington, D.C. of what and where to cut, there are 435 members of the U.S. House of Representatives, all of them defending their districts, all of them trying to get what they can for their districts and defend their district's interests. That's why it is so critically important, now more than ever, that Hawaii have a bipartisan congressional delegation, that we have somebody who's going to have a seat at the table in the majority caucus, who is going to be able to be there to be that outspoken voice for Hawaii that we need right now with this decision making.
Mr. Takai?
Well, you know, I go back to when Charles was in the State House. He voted against the state budget. When he was in City Council, he voted against every single council budget. And actually, when he was in Congress for the 7 months, he voted against a continuing resolution, which if he got his way, would have shut down government. I mean, I don't think that's the way we need to work here. We have a budget process at every level of government. And you know, Charles talks about cuts to spending, but we've got to talk about the impacts of how that's going to be. I mean, it's very easy, I think, from a legislative standpoint, to vote against the budget. But what you're doing by doing that is you're voting against every single program that's funded in the budget. So again, he voted against the state budget, every single city budget, and the federal budget on September 30th, 2010.
Let me, another question for Mr. Djou. This is from a viewer, David, and it kind of goes to this point, is that, you know, you represent yourself as a moderate, able to go fight for your district and so on, but he points out a very fundamental sort of functional problem that the Republicans at the national level have, and that is that the Tea Party conservatives are so conservative that they're actually criticizing other members of the Republican Party. I think you're envisioning coming from the other side. Will the Republican Party be able to hold together all this? And the question specifically is, how do you help the Speaker of the House from being held hostage by Tea Party members of Congress?
Well, it's by electing centrists, people who are interested in getting things done, people who are interested in helping families and advancing the interests of individuals here in Hawaii. I have a record of doing just that, and that's exactly what I'm doing in Congress here. But Daryl, let me follow up here very specifically here. You know what? That's what's wrong with Congress today, Daryl. I'm not running to be a conventional congressman. I'm not running to just be another guy who's going to go in there, do what he's told, follow along and march along the line of just how everybody else in the delegation or however the party leadership tells them to do. I think there's too much of that going on in Washington, D.C. right now. That's what's wrong with Capitol Hill. I'm here to change and reform that. I think we need more centrists, not fewer centrists.
Let me ask, Mr. Takai, do you think that what he's talking about is realistic?
Well, I don't think it matches his record. I mean, again, he voted against every single budget at every level of government which he served. And, you know, his very first vote is going to be for Speaker Boehner, and the Tea Party Republicans are running Congress right now. I think that's what we have to take a look at. And the fact is that when the Tea Party started in Hawaii, Charles was there. He was there at their very first rally speaking in support of the Tea Party platform. That's not a centrist perspective.
Let me bring it back to the original question about government spending, because I wanted to follow up. You know, as a progressive Democrat, which is how I think you would fairly hold yourself, there is a lot of pressure to cut the military spending. Wouldn't that be kind of a threat to Hawaii's economy? I mean, would you be willing to cut military spending if it meant losing a lot of military jobs in Hawaii?
Absolutely not.
So how do you do it? How do you do that?
How do I do it?
How do you cut military spending without affecting military jobs in Hawaii?
No, I'm saying we're not going to cut military spending.
I don't red box that. Around military spending?
Absolutely. I mean, I want to represent Hawaii, and the military is still an important part. It's our #2 economy in Hawaii, and it's very important. I'm going to support the military in Congress.
Do you think that's a realistic position?
No, I mean, the far left has been taking a battle axe to our defense budget. And again, you know, Daryl, again, let me point out here, this is, I think, something that is like very good and positive for your viewers to see and understand, because it shows a clear dividing line between myself and my opponent. For me, it's not going to be about ideology. It's about what works and what gets things done for the people of Hawaii, not falling in line with some liberal progressive ideology. That's what's wrong with Washington. Well, hang on here.
Okay, all right.
I want to point out here, in terms of spending here, okay, a philosophical difference between myself and my opponent. I don't believe throwing money at the problem, whatever the problem might be, fixes everything. I believe responsible budgeting. I believe that when the government spends its money year on year, we should try to keep the budget to increase no more than the rate of the economic growth rate plus inflation, because that's what families can afford.
Okay,
when the government increases that here, we become reckless.
I'm going to stop you because I think you've made yourself very clear. You've had about 4 or 5 shots at that. And Mr. Takai, you know, I think that what I'd like to get from you is, I was quite struck by this not cutting military spending, because is that outside the ideology that you represent?
I'm a member of the Hawaii Army National Guard, proud member. I also, as I mentioned before, have coordinated the military appreciation package for the legislature the past 11 years. I serve on the Chamber of Commerce's Military Affairs Council. I understand the importance of the military here in Hawaii, absolutely.
Okay, let me move on to another subject. Schools, you know, it seems that, you know, from most outside perspective, Hawaii schools have improved with some pressure from the federal government, with No Child Left Behind, followed by Race to the Top and so on. But overall, I'd like to know, do you think that, you know, is there things you'd like to change about the way the federal government does education reform so we don't get these complaints about top-down management onto schools? And let me start with you on that one, Mr.
You know, I'm glad you asked that, because I haven't had a chance to talk to about my family, but my wife and I are both public school graduates. She graduated from Honolulu High School. I graduated from Pro City, and we have 2 beautiful kids. They both go to public schools in IAEA. We're invested as a family in our public school system, and I'm a strong believer in our public school system. And the point here is that we're making significant progress. I just got briefed today on some of the steps we're taking, and we're doing quite well. Now, I do believe that the federal government should continue to play a role in education, but education is a states' rights issue, and we really need to focus on getting the money from education, whether it's federal or state monies, all the way to the child in that particular classroom with that qualified teacher. That's what I believe.
Okay, Mr. Djou, on that point, federal education, the hand the feds have in education and how it affects the classroom.
Well, Daryl, let me begin by saying that I actually agree with Mark that education should be controlled, not at the federal level, it should be controlled at the local level. Where I perhaps have some disagreement is I think there's over-centralization of our public education system here in Hawaii at the state level. I support decentralizing and pushing it down even further at the local level. But to answer your question directly in terms of the federal government, it does have an important role. I am a very strong supporter of education reform. The Race to the Top program, I think, was one of the best initiatives launched by the Obama administration. The Secretary of Education, Arne Duncan, I believe is the strongest member of President Obama's cabinet. He has been a zealous and outspoken advocate for decentralization, for local control, for merit pay for teachers, for making sure that education dollars get spent on kids and not on the bureaucracy. And if I'm privileged to get elected to Congress, I look forward to helping Secretary Duncan advance those goals.
Okay, we've only got a couple more minutes left, maybe 5 minutes at the most, and so I want to go to social issues a little bit. You know, that was one of the things we've gotten several questions about here. Mr. Djou in particular, your position on civil rights, same-sex marriage, what is it? I read you've been supportive of you know, marriage between a man and a woman, but would you take that into the legislative arena, or is that just a personal belief?
Well, Daryl, it's my personal belief. I've never changed that. I mean, my personal belief has been and always continues to be the same position that Barack Obama held when he first ran for president, the same position my opponent held up until very recently, that marriage should be a union between one man and one woman. With all of that said here, I understand that the law of the land here in Hawaii has been settled. I will respect that. I think it was done improperly. I wasn't the governor at the time, but had I been, I would have certainly never called a special session. And I think the right way we should have implemented it was by a vote of the people. In 1998, we had a vote of the people for traditional marriage. It should have been a vote of the people to reverse that.
Mr. Takai?
I proudly supported same-sex marriage in October, November of last year. I think it's a equal rights issue. It's a civil rights issue, and I think the state of Hawaii is better off because we have churches that now can marry couples that they support and love each other. And you know, I think that that's a big difference between Charles and me. I'm gonna stick with that position. I'm gonna continue. Now, he talked about my evolving, mentioned President Obama and others. You know, our society had to evolve. We evolved on this particular issue, and I'm very proud of the position that I hold right now because it is the right position.
Mr. Djou, are you capable of evolving on this issue? Maybe not to another position, but that's one question. The second question is, but again, do you think that there's going to be legislation on some of these social issues, and where will you be? Will you be to left of center, right of center? Where will you be on those ishes?
You know, Daryl, I think a lot of these issues are going to be decided by the United States Supreme Court. It's not going to be decided by the United States Congress. Whether I like it or not, I believe in the rule of law, and I will respect whatever it is that the United States Supreme Court eventually decides on this particular issue. But I will say this here, in terms of inner conviction and what you believe in, that isn't something that should evolve. You should have a firm conviction. And for me, it is my beliefs in terms of limited government, a belief in freedom, a belief in a commitment to the individual over the government. These are not going to evolve. These are going to change over time.
Okay. And finally, Mr. Takai, last word here on this, and probably anything else you want to throw in, because we've only got about 30 seconds.
Well, as I said before, I'm very proud of my vote supporting marriage equality. Many states are now following our lead, and I think it's important. There are going to be issues in Congress addressing social issues, and the fact that my opponent is going to support Speaker Boehner and the Tea Party Republicans is, again, as I said from the very beginning, not in line with the values of Hawaii.
Okay, we have to stop now. It's been a great hour. I really appreciate both of you.
Sure, thank you very much.
It was an exciting exchange. I think people will learn a lot. Next week on Insights on Kauai, GMOs, traffic, and tourism are issues in the Kauai mayor's election on November 4. Incumbent Bernard Cavallo took heavy flack for vetoing GMO-related pesticide regulations. Now he faces challenger Dustin Barca, a professional surfer and mixed martial arts fighter, making his first bid for public office. Where do they stand on the important issues facing the Garden Island? That's next time on Insights on PBS Hawaii. I'm Daryl Huff. Ahui ho.